Hello and welcome to another Manna podcast. My name is Jeff Glenn. I'm a pastor here at Lighthouse, and it's my pleasure to take you through the Word each week. We've been in Genesis, and it's been a couple weeks since we've seen each other, so Happy New Year. And last week we finished up Genesis. We talked about Melchizedek, who was found in Genesis 14. We actually were in Hebrews, but this week we'll get back into chapter 15 and take a quick look at it today. And really what we see in chapter 15 is this great hope of the promises of God. And we see that through this interaction between Abram and God in this covenant that's created. And, so it brings a question that, don't you ever wish that you could see something that a Bible character saw? I think about that. That's pretty cool. But today we'll see that we can. We can see exactly what Abram saw in this chapter 15. So this chapter details God's promise to Abram and to prosper him with offspring so numerous that it would rival the number of the stars in the sky. We see that in Genesis 15:5 when it says, "Then he brought him outside and said, 'Now look toward the heaven and count the stars, if you are able to number them.' And he said to him, 'So shall your descendants be.'" And this great part in verse 6, "And he believed in the Lord, and he accounted it to him for righteousness." And so Abram's belief in what God had promised here was accounted to him as righteousness, not anything that Abraham had done. So, today with light pollution and even atmospheric pollution, depending on where you live, like it may not seem a quite remarkable large number to count, but it's not until you spend a night in the wilderness or out camping that you see this for what Abram saw, that the sheer magnitude of the nighttime sky with all of the stars in it, and even if you're super nerdy, right, and you're going to tell me, well, what we see in the nighttime sky, some of those are just planetary bodies that are reflecting sunlight, and really it's only the suns out there that are the stars. So great, but even then, it's a staggering number, right? If you're able to discern between the stars and the planetary bodies that are just reflecting light, and you're able to count those and figure out how many there are. And so that's why it says, if you are able. The implication being is you're not able to, right? So, and I would challenge you to try this. And post your comments below that, go out tonight or probably not tonight because it's going to be cloudy, but on a cloud-free night, go out. Count the number of stars, get a little pen and paper and kind of check off how many stars you see and then let me know. No Googling, however. And so obviously God wasn't inviting Abram to do the same, right? He wasn't wanting Abram to get a pen or a piece of charcoal and a skin of an animal and kind of check off how many stars he found. It was really this picture of God's magnanimous promise to Abram, this visual of a sky full of stars at night, and we know that it's an awe to behold, and it brings us to a point of reverence and awe. And so to think that would be the scale and scope of Abram's offspring. So we know today on this side of history, right, currently there's 8 billion people on the planet, and prior to Abram's time, perhaps an equal amount. And so how many of those are exactly Abram's offspring? It's hard to say, but a good number of them for sure. And so equally hard to number exactly how many of Abram's offspring there are in the world today. And so the point, God's promise to Abram was awesome, and it was magnificent, just in the sheer size and scope. And so sometimes in a movie, you'll see where the character has some kind of a flashback or some kind of flashing of events before their eyes, and what you see is these pictures going by the screen, and they're kind of blurry, and they're going by fast. And, God could have done that to Abram with his offspring, right? Like ticked off all the offspring coming before Abram's eyes, but he didn't, right? So that's what I think is amazing, is exactly what Abram saw, we can see as well. And so God's purpose was to show Abram the sheer magnitude of the promise that was before him. And then he does something that's equally as cool, that in order to provide assurance to Abram, God had him prepare a covenant offering. And so in that day, that was the handshake, or the word is my bond, or the signature on the dotted line that said that this was something that the two people were bound to, this agreement that two people were bound to. And so as any contract that we might sign today, it's where both persons are bound to their agreement on penalty of whatever the contract is. But in Abram's day, what would happen is they would do what is called cutting a covenant, and actually the word covenant comes from an ancient word that means to cut. And so what they would do is they would choose animals that would represent the size of the deal that they were making, and so it would be some bulls or some goats or maybe some birds, and the big animals they would divide in half. And then they would arrange those so that the two people that were cutting the covenant could walk in, each from their own direction, and meet in the middle, and that would be cutting of the covenant. And the implication would be is if you don't keep your end of the bargain, you might as well end up just like one of those divided animals laying there dead, kind of rotting. And so the symbolism here is important, and that the understanding that it's serious business if you do not keep your end of the bargain. However, that's not how this covenant went down. We see it began that way. Abram, he selected the animals, and he killed them, and he prepared them and arranged them for the covenant ceremony, and then he waited. He was waiting for God to come in, and he waited some more. And then it was at this point that the exposed flesh of the animals was attracting vultures, and vultures were coming in, and they were trying to get their feed of meat. And so Abram was busy swatting them away and spending his energy and effort trying to preserve this covenant arrangement so that God could come in and meet him in the middle. And Abram eventually, after all this waiting and effort, grows tired. And he was trying to do his best to meet God, but he fell asleep. And it was then that God completed the covenant. It was then that God took it upon himself in his strength, by his authority, and his signaling that he alone was the keeper of the covenant. So despite Abram's weakness, right, in that he was unable to stay awake after the chore of preparing the animals and fending off the vultures. I'm sure this was a very long day for Abram. And of course, at the end of the day, we all get exhausted, and Abram was exhausted and he fell asleep. And so that was when God came in and completed the covenant on his own. And so there you have it. Listen closely, because we have a God initiated, God performed, or God completed. So God initiated, God completed, and a God sustained covenant. Now, that should ring a bell to you Bible people out there, and we'll explain that next week. But in the meantime, if you figure out where you've heard that before, or that concept before, add that to the comments as well. And until then, stay encouraged and stay in the Word.